Сегодня я хотел бы показать вам интервью, которое я сделал со своим другом, выдающимся итальянским саксофонистом и композитором Эмануэле Cisi. Это один из лучших музыкантов, которых мне доводилось встречать, и во многом он для меня воплощает образ того настоящего джазмена, что сразу приходит на ум при упоминании слова «джаз». У него множество регалий, которые я сейчас не буду все перечислять. Достаточно будет сказать, что последние 4 года он признавался лучшим тенор-саксофонистом Италии и Западной Европы. А его последний альбом «No Eyes», посвященный гениальному Лестеру Янгу, бьет все мыслимые и немыслимые рекорды в европейских и американских чартах. Интервью мы записали некоторое время назад на международном фестивале «Джаз-май» в Пензе, и оно посвящено тому, какой путь проходит джазовый музыкант в жизни, чтобы стать тем, кто он есть, какие сложности он преодолевает. Ну, вы сейчас и сами все увидите. Если вам понравится, буду рад, если вы поддержите это видео лайком и напишите, что думаете об этом интервью. Внизу я разместил ссылку на нашу группу ВКонтакте с музыкой Эмануэля Cisi. Обязательно заходите и послушайте. Уже в марте, кстати, я организую его 3-й гастроли по России, так что следите за новостями и приятного вам просмотра. Спасибо.
Hello, Senor Cisi.
Hello.
How are you? What are your
Very good.
impressions from the last day?
Oh, it's been an incredible week. I think it's almost a week.
I think more than a week.
More than a week. Okay.
We traveled last 2 weeks at all.
It's been, you know, a really incredible experience for me because it's the first time I came in Russia. I used to travel. I visited many different countries around the world. I am really surprised by the warmth of the people here. All the audiences we had during the concerts were absolutely fantastic. The best thing that a jazz musician can desire, you know, to play in front of such these audiences. Smaller cities is that the people has an open heart, you know, and they desire to receive something direct, something pure. They have no filters because they probably they don't know that much about jazz, about styles of jazz, about specific topics, you know, in music, in harmony or whatever. But they are really ready to receive something, and I'm really, I'm really impressed. You know, for me, music is something that I always dreamed to do in my life. I had no any musical tradition in my family. My parents weren't not at all into music. My grandparents neither. But since I was very, very young, probably 5-6 years old, I knew that this is what I wanted to do in my life. I discovered that there was a school called conservatory where you can go and study music. And I always asked to my parents to go there because that was the most important thing for me. But since there were no tradition of music in my family, my parents said, no, you go to the normal school, you go your normal studies. And I said, please, I want to go there. No, you finish. You know, in Italy we have different cycles. You have 5 years of primary school. Mm-hmm. At the end of the primary school, again, I said, please, I want to go there to study music. No, first you go to the normal school and then we'll see, you know. And so it was really like, you know, something that I conquered because then I was 15 years old. I went to the, it's called Classic Lycée in Italy. And at the end of the second year, I was doing pretty all right, you know, not incredible, but I was pretty, you know. And I decided stop. I don't want to study anymore this. I want to study music. So I said to my parents, I stopped to go to the school, and I want to study music. So it was a kind of, you know, in the full adolescence, you know, with a medium class family. It was like a bomb, you know. It was like, wow, what are you doing? You're stupid. You want to stop your studies? And I said, yes, I want to study music.
It was a challenge. I mean,
yeah,
conflict with family.
Of course.
The ideas which you already believe in.
Of course. So, but I had a big. I conquered the fact that they agreed in buy me my first saxophone. You know, so I had this first saxophone in my hands. It was a used the second-hand terrible alto saxophone, but for me it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Since I was already in contact with jazz, because when I was 11 years old, I had a friend older than me, and he brought me to discover jazz live. So I discovered jazz in live concerts much before than on records, you know. So the first concert I ever saw in my life was R. Blakey Jazz Messengers. First, you know. The second night it was a festival in Ligurian coast, and the second one was Max Roach Quartet. You know, it was probably 76, 77. So I thought to myself, if one day I became a musician, this is the music I want to play. I didn't know nothing, but you know, I was totally impressed by this spontaneous energy, by these sounds, by that rhythm, you know. And so when I had the first saxophone in my hand, it was like I was already, you know, I had already a big introjection of informations, of sound. I knew how my saxophone should have sound, you know. I knew already what kind of sound, if it was okay or not.
You don't try to parody. I mean, to parody to other musicians,
yes,
or other sound.
Yes, of course. But you know, I was a self-taught musician, and so you know, to go back to your question, my feeling in jazz music has always been to be really spontaneous. And even if I studied a lot of different styles, I had a lot of heroes, I still have a lot of heroes. I mean, my biggest influences are musicians that I still listen to right now. And they are the biggest inspiration for me. But at the same time, I've always been very broad to improvise in a very natural way, you know. And so I think that a big part of my way of playing came from the emotions and the feelings that I had when I was a child and then a kid, and I discovered music, you know. And then, of course, little by little, you know, I added all the knowledge, and I started to study Charlie Parker, and then, you know, John Coltrane and the other masters. And of course, I gave a shape to my language, but the deepest thing for me remains to be spontaneous, and most of all to have joy in playing. For me, there is no difference in playing in front of a 5,000 people audience, or to play in a small club with 20 people. You know, it's for me, it's always. Art Blakey used to say a very important thing for me. He used to say, jazz musicians, anytime you had the chance to have a solo, is a chance that God gives you, you know, and you don't have to waste it, you know. So this is a kind of for me of low, you know, in my approach.
How you find yourself?
I think that you know, first, for my generation, was definitely easier than for the modern generations, because at that time in Italy, yes, there were few musicians at a very high level, but not like today. You know, I mean, maybe in my city there were, I don't know, 5, 6 saxophone players. You know, it was a small family in a way, so it was easier to, in a way, to break. You know, I don't know if today would be the same, honestly, but how I found my sound, I think that it came mostly from this this passion, this devotion I always had through the music, through the fact of, since as explained, it was I feel like I conquered the chance to it was like I feel very lucky, you know, because I became a professional musician. So it's such a joy, such a something that fills my whole life, that anytime I have the opportunity to play, to put the saxophone in my mouth and express what I feel inside, for me is the most important thing, you know. Jazz is not a kind of music that created around a great business. You know? So since the American way of life has always been based on this, you know, so jazz music has always been kept somehow, you know, on the border of this, and so that's why here I feel that it's completely different. I'm really honest, and okay, playing in New York is fantastic because you know that you are playing in the place where all the greatest musicians in this music have ever played. So, you know, it's a challenge. You must be at the level. You know, you really must do your best. But here, honestly, I have another kind of pleasure, totally different. The pleasure to play for people that really loves what you do, because you see that you are doing it in a very honest and pure way. You know, what is jazz for me? Jazz is first of all a way to live. It's first of all the chance to express what you really are, and you can do it using a language. Nowadays it's become common that we used to call people or critics or journalists or people, you know, in general, used to call jazz a lot of different things that actually are not jazz. You know, even especially the promoters and the big festivals, you know, big jazz festival, and then you had Deep Purple playing in, you know. I think jazz is a language. It's a language made of a big and deep tradition that came from New Orleans, that evolved in many ways and included more and more different spices, different accents, different colors, different dialects, you know. So it's more and more spread in the history, you know. If you start from New Orleans and you go ahead, the more and more, you know, you have different elements coming into jazz, and then they derivate in other styles of music or whatever. I must say that for me, jazz, it has a very spiritual meaning. Besides the fact that, okay, I can say one of the most important element in jazz for me is the swing. But I'm not talking about, you know, the swing, tapping, you know, swing in terms of, yes, of energy, of way of playing over a rhythm, over a beat, you know, over a fluxus of ideas. And so that's why I love so much many different kind of jazz, from the New Orleans style to big band era, to bebop, to cool jazz, to hard bop, to free jazz, etc. But many people used to think that after Charlie Parker, jazz is dead.
Yeah,
yes, I know. And in a way, I agree. In a way, understand me. I'm sure that there was a unique line coming from the very beginning.
You mean New Orleans style? Yeah.
Yes, until the Second World War II. You know, and at this right moment when bebop appears and the big band era finished, the way split it in two parts. So until that moment, the jazz was a popular music.
Yeah.
People used to dance jazz. You know, when Duke Ellington and Count Basie used to do their battle with the big bands, with their big bands at the Apollo Theater, for instance, you know, people used to go there and dance. They were not sitting and listening to, they were dancing all the time. So it was dancing music. It was a popular music.
So they, in the beginning they created a special for dancers.
Yeah.
So it's make borders for the music, for creation, because they can move. Because if it will be difficult rhythmic or too difficult harmony, is it that?
Yeah, I mean, this is partially true for me, because if you listen carefully to some of that music that those guys used to play at the time, Count Basie, Lester Young, Duke Ellington, there are some arrangements from Duke Ellington from the 30s which are amazingly complex and sophisticated, you know. But still there was this pulse, you know, this kind of way to conceive the beat, the swing, the rhythm that allows to the people to dance. Then this was finished. Charlie Parker came, big crisis, big band finished, and the jazz starts to be a music for listeners and stop. You know? So from one side this, in the other side, the black people that used to live jazz as a dancing music, they needed to do it again. So at that moment there was the birth in a way of the rhythm and blues, you know?
Yeah.
And then became rock and roll and so on. So there was another, you know, another way of, yeah. But so this is an interpretation, but it's also true that somehow these two paths crossed many times. How many players? I mean, Charlie Parker, of course, is one of, for me, the greatest genius that ever walked on this planet. Of course, that's clear. But I always been fascinated, mostly even by other kind of musicians, of saxophone player in the specific, like for instance, Gene Ammons. You know, Gene Ammons, it was right in the middle in a way, because it was incorporated element of bebop, so his playing, his phrasing was pretty complex, pretty articulated, but at the same time he kept this church and then black attitude in playing music. He was the son of a very famous boogie woogie piano player, Albert Ammons, you know. So, you know, there was an interaction. I mean, there was not so completely separated, and this was I always liked in music. Or Dizzy Gillespie, you know, when he went right after the bebop years, he started to incorporate elements from Cuban music, from Latin music, and it's always tended to go again through this way of conceived jazz, you know, like dancing music. And in my way to approach jazz, this is very important. I like to play with this kind of attitude. I'm not thinking about, you know, only an intellectual approach, or I really love when there is this kind of possibility to dance. I love when people dance to my concerts. It happens pretty rarely because people is not used, you know. But in Murmansk, when we played the Rock and Roll Club, it was absolutely fantastic. Then a couple started to dance, and it was, for me, it was great. You know, I love this because I know in this exact moment that I'm giving something else, emotion, but also, you know, a way to live my music to live my music and my way to play jazz also in a very physical and groovy way, you know. So to close this long answer, talking about contemporary jazz, I think that more and more the last evolution of jazz became more and more cerebral and really more and more far from the original concept of jazz. You know, when I think to contemporary musicians in New York, very often I listen to some incredibly complex and complicated and cerebral music, and I'm really amazed by the level of the musicians because it's played in a very incredible way. There is a beautiful statement by Lou Donaldson, the great alto player that used to play with Art Blakey, and, you know. He's very funny. In an interview for Downbeat, they asked about what do you think about contemporary jazz, and he said contemporary jazz for me is horrible music played in a sublime way. I think it's fantastic. I see young people coming to a jazz concert. Okay, it's not jazz in what as I used to conceive it, you know, but there were improvisation, there was a lot of elements that for me this was jazz, you know, in a way. So I hope that can be one of the directions where this music can go. I think that to go through the extreme cerebralism and extreme composition and writing music more and more and more and more and more can bring to you say a cul-de-sac, you know, kind of closed street, you know, in a way. When I was maybe 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, fusion music arrived in Italy too, you know. It was mid-80s. And right at that moment, actually, I had my first very important professional experience with a very famous Italian band where I was called to be part of. And we were playing, yes, kind of fusion music, you know. And I was, at this moment, you know, totally excited and fascinated by this kind of music, you know. There were bands like Steps Ahead or Yellow Jackets, you know, this kind of, and but pretty shortly I felt that it wasn't I was missing something if I had continued to insist in this, and so that was the exact moment that I really started to study the tradition. I really started to go back and back and back, and I discovered Lester Young, Ben Webster, and Coleman Hawkins, and Gene Ammons, and Louis Armstrong, and Roy Eldridge, etc., etc.
It's very unusual because everybody thinks about the progress, and you make a step in another way.
Yeah, but you know, one person that was very important for me at this moment was my great friend, Brian from Marsalis. We are very close friends. Since then, since 1983, we met, and we still are very, very good friends. I remember when we met, the first time we met, there was no internet at the time. It was much more difficult to communicate and keep in touch, you know. But we used to write letters each other, you know.
Oh.
Yes, and I remember that I was asking to him advices, you know, like because at the time he was started to play with Sting, you know, Sting,
yes.
You know, the pop singer, and so you know, I used to write to him, "Hey, Brian, I know now you're doing this great gig with Sting, it's fantastic, but what do you think? I like very much this music, fusion and all this stuff, but you know, I feel that there is something missing." And he used to say to me, "Brother, you have to don't consider this. I mean, this this is just gig. It's a nice experience even for me. I will buy my home and I will, you know, I will set it down my life with this work with Sting, with these world tours and records, etc. But nothing to see with music, with jazz music. If you want to learn this music, you have to go back and to study masters. And he gave me advices, you know. He let me discover Chubari or players that I was even aware of the existence, you know, of these players. And records, he gave me tons of records, you know, Soulville by Ben Webster or other records, you know. It's Branford that gave me the tips. So, you know, yeah, that was a very, very important turning point for me. Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people will be interested to know 3 musicians which you really recommend, and 3 albums of jazz which you really recommend from all jazz world. I know it's a suicide, but try.
Okay, that's very hard. Okay, so I will suggest ballads by John Coltrane.
Okay.
Then Kind of Blue of Miles Davis, and Concert by the Sea by Errol Garner.
Oh.
Why? Ballads for me is a famous record of Coltrane, recorded in '62, in a moment where he was considered the most avant-garde man in the moment, and he already did some incredible and shocking records for the jazz community at the time.
Didn't think that
you know,
it happened.
Yeah, and then he did this album. Okay, the history, you know, says that probably part was, you know, influenced by his producer Bob Thiel, Impulse Record, and part was his own will to do a record like this. But anyway, he did it, and he did it an incredible record of ballads, slow tunes, romantic songs, and for me this record has been and it still is one of my Bibles for the sound. In this record there is for me the most beautiful sound is the sound of the angels for me, you know. It's really
Angels.
Yeah, is the most beautiful sound of saxophone and of a group playing together that I can ever imagine.
It's an incredible song.
Sometimes it doesn't even improvise, you know, just play the melody, the pure melody, and it's, you know, so it reflects really my approach in playing melodies, you know. So, Kind of Blue of Miles Davis it's a really phenomenal record because of the atmosphere, because of the different elements mixed together. We have John Coltrane, again we have the magic of Miles, kind of Bill Evans. Actually, Kind of Blue actually is a record of Bill Evans, you know, in terms of all the musical ideas included in Kind of Blue came from Bill Evans. So I think it's a very unique record where you can have the perception of how it's possible to play jazz without thinking about hyper complex music or too you know, neurotic music, because it's really, there is a lot of space, a lot of sound too in this record.
And from all songs, which you prefer?
In Kind of Blue?
Yes, Kind of Blue.
Man.
So all flamenco sketches.
Maybe flamenco sketches, you know, because it really incorporates the lyrism of Bill Evans and the yes, it's magic, you know, pure magic. And then Concert by the Sea by Errol Garner. I said this record, but there are many others that could come to my mind, but this one I love it particularly because Errol Garner really embodies what the purest meaning of jazz is to me.
Because he didn't know notes?
Yes, it was a totally, completely animal player. You know, he doesn't know nothing of music theory, nothing, not one note. He was playing it all by ear, you know, and it's really, you know, he is the jazz. You know, there is the amount of swing, the amount of energy inside his music. You can really dance. You can, you know, you can. It's so fun. It's the sun. It's pure happy and joy. You know. So.
Thank you, Emanuele.
You're welcome.
Thanks that you came. You arrived. That you interest all the things. So I hope it's not last visit, and people see you soon.
I hope so. Sure.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.